Namaskar, good evening, and welcome to Reality Check 4 of our End Human Trafficking series. I'm Sunita Krishnan with my co-moderator, Salil Kadir, who is the cultural advisor in the US Consulate of Hyderabad. Today, welcoming all of you all for this very unique virtual webinar with amazing and eminent prosecutors and private lawyers. As you all know, Reality Check is a series started and hosted by Prajwala. Prajwala is a voluntary organization working on anti-human trafficking for the last 25 years. We've been instrumental in removing over 23,000 women and children out of sex trafficking and providing them a very safe place for rehabilitation and reintegration. In the last 25 years, we have removed close to 23,000 of these young girls, and we've set up one of the largest rehabilitation homes in the world. So we come from that background, and my co-moderator, Salil Kadir, is somebody who has been with the cause for the last 10 years, supporting us, joining us in whatever way he can. Reality Check was conceived by both of us to start a dialogue between all our stakeholders to understand why, after so many years, we are not able to end human trafficking. What are the gaps within us, and what are the remedial measures for all of us to take? On Reality Check 1, we had civil society organizations who spoke about the immense competition between NGOs for resources, the lack of skills, the lack of competence in dealing with human trafficking issues. They spoke also about donor-driven agendas and how that is actually adversely impacting the development sector. In Reality Check 2, we had two eminent jurists, Supreme Court retired Justice Lokur and sitting judge Swati Chauhan, who spoke about how courts are struggling to become victim centric. Where are the gaps in skills? Where are the gaps in the orientation? Why are we getting such low conviction rates? So many things, into such a compelling conversation that we had with Justice Lokur and Judge Chauhan. In Reality Check 3, we met three super cops. And for the first time, three super cops who have done such extraordinary work fighting trafficking spoke about the difficulties police face in dealing with these issues, the problems, the limitations they have. They also spoke about synergy and convergence between stakeholders. Today, we are entering into a completely new zone. For the first time, to my knowledge, I don't know whether there has been such conversations elsewhere, but to my knowledge, this is a first of its kind conversation with public prosecutors and private lawyers to understand why we have such low conviction rates. Why don't victims have the right to represent themselves? Why are we failing in prosecution? These are the multiple questions that we will be asking today to our very eminent panelist, Mrs. Aparna Bhatt, who's a Supreme Court advocate, Cassandra Fernandez, whom we will call Cassie, from the International Justice Mission, done human amount of work with hundreds of victims herself, two fantastic public prosecutors whom I have had the personal honor of working for the last more than 15 years, Mr. Premnath, an assistant public prosecutor, senior assistant public prosecutor from Kerala, and Mr. Rozedar, who was the former deputy director of prosecution, Andhra Pradesh. I welcome our panelists. And before we go into this very, very, very exciting conversation, I'm super excited because this is the first of its kind. May I also take the opportunity to welcome more than 300 public prosecutors who have joined from Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Odisha for this virtual conference. We are also joined with a lot of our very, very close partners from Bangladesh, different parts of the country, well-wishers, people who feel so much for the cause of human trafficking have joined us on the Zoom. I welcome each one of you all, and I hand it over to Salil to briefly give us the format of this virtual conversation, because today is definitely looking very different from any other virtual conferences that we have had.
Thank you so much, Sunita. And once again, a very warm welcome to over 300 participants who have joined us today from various parts of the country, but also outside the country. Very quickly, some ground rules. This is for our own benefits. We have participants who are watching this broadcast here on Zoom, but also on Facebook. So my first request to you is that please listen to the entire session carefully. I'm sure you have a lot of questions that you have for our panelists. So we will not be able to take live questions, as in we will not be able to bring you on camera or unmute you to take these questions. There may be just too many of them to do so physically. So my request to you is if you could put down your questions in the chat box right here. You can see a chat box on the right, those of you who are on Zoom. Those of you who have joined us on Facebook, please feel free to comment in the comment section on Facebook. We have our wonderful colleagues, Ms. Swasti Rana and Mr. Nitin, who are constantly monitoring both the chat boxes here on Zoom as well as on Facebook, and they will be feeding these questions to us, and we will ensure that we pose these questions to our eminent panel today. To our panelists, my request is we have quite a few questions, and from our past experience of the three episodes that we've done, is that there are a lot of questions from the audience, and we want to ensure that we respect that, we respect the time that they have given to us, and of course, very intelligent questions that come. So to you, I would request if you could limit your responses to about 2 to 3 minutes per question. It would allow us to rotate the conversation, but also leave us enough time at the end to pick up questions from our audience. And to the rest of you who have joined us here on Zoom, once again, my request to you is please keep your cameras switched off so that we have the best bandwidth available for a high quality broadcast. Thank you so much, and over to you, Sunita.
Thanks, Salil. And may I just again reiterate to all our participants on Zoom to please switch off your cameras and to mute yourself. And a very, very, very warm welcome to the thousands of our viewers who are watching this on FB. I don't know, I'm so nervous right now because this has not been done before. I'm as excited as each one of you all here, and actually a little nervous also because I don't know how the next 1.5 hours will phase out. But I would like to start our conversation with Aparna Bhatt. Aparna Bhatt, and is a Supreme Court advocate, and I've had the honor of working with her for many years, and she's represented us on several cases. Aparna ji, I want to ask you that prosecution is the weakest link in the anti-trafficking intervention. Most often than not, never, very rarely, in very few meager cases where actually the public prosecutor is even interacting with the victim or investing in a case of human trafficking with the police. What do you think is the reason for such low priority? Is it because the prosecutors consider this as some kind of a routine case? While we on one end speak about human trafficking, we call it as an organized crime, the third largest organized crime, and millions of women and children are being enslaved and entrapped in that organized crime. And it's a billion-dollar industry and so on and so forth, meaning we have so much of hype about the problem itself. But when it comes to the actual problem being dealt in the court by prosecutors, it appears that it has very, very low priority. What do you think is the reason for the same?
Okay. I thank you, Sunita. It's great to be here. One of the things I would want to say is that I do not think it's the weakest link. I would say it's one of the strongest link. And they're the voice of the victim. They're the voice of, they're our voice in the court. So given that they have a very critical role to play. There are various reasons about why prosecution happens the way it happens. First of all, unfortunately, prosecution have very little autonomy in the way the investigation is done. They hardly have any say in how the investigation is done. So they're basically presenting a case which is presented to them by somebody else. And more often than not, the somebody else is somebody that they do not have control over. So that is their first challenge. So when you are presenting a case on behalf of somebody else, obviously you're relying on the somebody else. Police is who are the people who present the case to them. They're relying on the police for all the information. And by convention, they tend to believe the police and not people like me, and victims who may have things to say to them. So the whole disconnect between victims who have actually the people who need the justice the most in these cases, and the prosecution case as presented by the police, there's a complete disconnect which happens in the beginning itself. And because the disconnect happens in the beginning itself, the victim and the prosecution invariably run two parallel tracks. So in cases where a judge is empathetic and the judge is allowing a victim to be represented by her lawyer effectively as a partner with the prosecution, the victim will get to have her say. In cases where the judge is does not allow the victim's lawyer to have her say, it is the prosecution who gets to say, and that becomes completely a different case altogether. You also had another question in the same point that you made about interaction, prosecution interaction with the victims or anybody else, survivors, victims, whatever you call them, witnesses. Unfortunately, conventionally, what happens is they do not engage with the victims. POCSO has helped it to a significant extent. In POCSO cases, for example, cases which are sexual abuse cases referred to a special court. In those cases, what happens is that the special prosecutor is appointed, they know they're dealing only with children, and there's a different level of empathy that comes along, so they deal with them. There is a space for them to engage with the victim an earlier day, there's a court visit, all these things happen and prosecutors engage with the victim. But unfortunately, in trafficking cases, it doesn't routinely happen. Cases where people like IGM and Justice and Care, these organizations are involved, or Prajwala, many organizations are involved, and they go and talk to the prosecutor a day in advance or some days in advance, and the prosecutors engaged with them to understand what the case is. You will see the difference, which is a significant difference, because the prosecution knows there is a human face behind this suffering. The moment they come to know there's a human face behind the suffering and they're able to put a face to the crime, then the way they react is very different. So it's actually a very complicated process that happens in the criminal justice system, in which prosecutors are a key part, and unfortunately they haven't yet come of age as we would like to be. And I think that may be the biggest failure.
Thank you, Aparna-ji. Thank you. That set the tone for this conversation. And I'm going to come to you, Mr. Premnath, with my next question. Sir, we all know about the right to a fair trial, and one of the principles that the International Association of Prosecutors promotes is to always protect an accused person's right to a fair trial. And if I can say more particularly, to ensure that the evidence that is there which is favorable to the accused is disclosed in accordance with law or the requirements of a fair trial. But what we see mostly in cases of human trafficking often is that while the accused seems to have so many rights and often powerful, very high-profile lawyers, the victim does not seem to have even the right to representation. So I would like to elicit your views on this.
Thank you, Salir. First of all, let me thank Sunita-ji for giving me an opportunity to address more than 327 prosecutors across the country, because my state is only having around 150 prosecutors. And as rightly pointed out by you, I am a member of All India Prosecutors Association. The rights of the accused always find a good place in the criminal justice system. Even to our knowledge that even only in 2009, even though UN passed a UN Convention on Victims of Crime and Rights of Victim and Abuse of Power, passed in 1985, the word victim came to Criminal Procedure Code only in 2009. So that itself shows the word was lacking to us. Even victim compensation 357A came in that year only. So the entire procedure was, the criminal justice system till 2009 was not a victim-centric. It was only the rights of the accused was valued very much in all the systems. But now there is a slow change towards the rights of the victim also. And now victim can also appoint an advocate, but it can only assist as per section 301. It can only assist the prosecutor and also give written submission. In one cases with Rega Mukhare versus state of West Bengal, the court went to the extent, Supreme Court went to the extent that even if any questions were missed by the prosecutors, the particular question can be given to the magistrate by the advocate of the victim and put to the concerned witness also. So, and there are many rights, even in camera proceedings, video conferencing, mock trial, all this can be done only when the prosecutor takes a good interest on this particular topic. So the interest of the prosecutor is a must. And moreover, as rightly said by Aparna Bhatt, that empathy should be there towards the victim also. And there should be more awareness to the prosecutors also. To my knowledge, there is no human trafficking training programs conducted for prosecutors in Kerala. I think in many other states, they are conducting anything. Because we never think that it is not so important also. So first of all, the state should take much interest in creating awareness. We should have a judicial colloquium. Most of the prosecutors and judges are gender biased also to some extent. So we should have judicial colloquiums involving prosecutors, judicial officers, police officers, and NGO also. Then only the sad plight of the victim can be discovered before these people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prem. I'm so glad that you raised this issue of training and orientation. Cassandra Fernandez, Cassie, if I may come to you. In Reality Check 3, we had, Reality Check 2, we had two very eminent judges. And Judge Chauhan said that, especially in cases of human trafficking, the officer should have a deeper knowledge about the problem itself. And only then the person can do justice to the case. So, you've been working for now, I don't know how many years. I've been seeing you for at least 10 years now, working with victims. What do you think is the status of knowledge and skills among prosecutors in relation to human trafficking cases?
Thank you, Sunita. Yes, I've been working in the sector for about 15 years now. And yes, so what I've come to see is that there are trainings happening to some extent. But to a large extent, trainings on laws relating to anti-trafficking are not happening. And even if they do, the trainings would mostly be on legislations. Very little focus is given to training prosecutors on sensitivity towards the victims. So this, I believe, is really the crux of the matter. This is what is lacking. Very often when the victims come to court, they would be in the first time the victims come to court would be at the time of a remand. And at that time, they may be hostile because they may have been removed out of the situation of trafficking only about a day before that. They have been brainwashed by the perpetrators. They've been brainwashed by the traffickers. And they are not willing to cooperate with the police, with the prosecutor. And very often, this is the state in which the prosecutors see the victims for the first time. So it's very easy for the prosecutors to actually believe that these girls are hardened. These girls want to do this willingly. They don't want to come out of the place. But it's very important to give a background into what these victims actually go through. It's very important to let them know what it actually entails, what trafficking actually entails. The fact that these girls may have been kidnapped, wrongly influenced, drugged, threatened, and forcefully brought into the sector. The fact that they are traumatized. They are tortured into actually accepting this way of living. And by the time they come to court, they're still in that state of trauma. And actually being in a courtroom setting traumatizes them further. They've been through unimaginable sorts of torture. And it's also very important to also point out to the prosecutors that this is an organized crime, as you mentioned, Sunita, just a while back. It's not something that just happens between someone who kidnaps a girl and just passes them on to the brothel keeper. There is a whole chain of traffickers, there's a whole chain of perpetrators, some of whom may never actually get caught and may never actually come before the court. So the victim goes through all of this, and by the time she comes to court and the prosecutors first see her, she's in the state where she's not willing to cooperate unless there is something where she sees that the court or the prosecutor is willing to actually hear her out. The prosecutor is willing to give her a listening ear. So this, I believe, is very important to actually take out to the prosecutors. There must be mandatory trainings for prosecutors, and especially in laws related to anti-trafficking and laws related to sexual abuse of victims. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra. I'm going to continue my question in the same vein on procedures. And my question is to you, Mr. Rosedar.
Please.
So it is often seen that prosecution is not very robust in opposing bail applications of the accused. Also, in the event of a breach of the bail stipulation by the accused, the prosecution is never keen on applying for cancellation of the bail which has been granted to the accused. Can you explain why this happens?
Yes. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to the Sunita Krishnan Madam and Salil Khadar sir and all the participants. Good evening to all. To save time, I will come to this straight to the point. And out of my experience, 23 years in the prosecution field, in various designations at various places, I would like to say that this is because of one, the police after investigation, they won't identify the exact background of that accused. And once the bail application is coming for hearing, and when the public prosecutor is ready to submit his version, the whole story, background story will not be placed before the court. Sometimes the court may take his very lenient view and the court may pass an order for enlarging him in on bail. And later, the police will come for cancellation of the bail. There will be no proper ground for preferring cancellation of bails because of the pale grounds they make only for the purpose of satisfying their higher officials. So the CD is very, very important. In any criminal case diary is very, very important. If the case diary is not properly prepared, then we can't project the case properly about the background of the accused and the victims, what is the damage caused to the victim. So the very, very important thing in criminal cases is preparation of case diary. The police, they take it light about the preparation of a casual in preparation of the case diaries, and when those case diaries are reaching on the bench, the officers, the presiding officers, they are taking the matter in a light way and casually, and they are enlarging on bail. Once bail is granted, the accused immediately may jump to other jurisdictions, and it is very difficult to bring back before the court. So it is for the police to train them that in most particularly in trafficking cases, the CD must be very, very, very not casual. It should be very, very particular, incorporating all the facts from all the corners about the background of the accused to create seriousness and to explain the damage caused to the victim. This is lacking in the CDs. That is one of the reasons. That is why the higher courts are not convincing for the purpose of cancellation of the bails. This is one strong point in that.
Thank you, Rosedar Garu. And just to tell all our guests who are on Zoom, you can, if you want, if there is any compelling questions that is coming to your mind at this point, you can keep posting it on the chat box. Our colleagues, Swasti Rana is watching all the questions that's coming on the chat box, which will be asked at the end to the panelists, and to all our friends, thousands of them on Facebook. Please give your questions on the comments. Nitin, my colleague, is monitoring the FB Live comments, and all the questions from there also will be posted to the panelists. Coming to you, Aparna, you have worked with thousands of victims. In fact, I consider you as one of the strongest voices in the court for the rights of the victims. You were responsible for getting video conferencing as a means to record evidence way back in 2003 in Delhi High Court in a case that involved a victim from Rajwala. Keeping the procedures laid by the law and understanding the unique condition of the victims, especially human trafficking cases. And when we look at sex trafficking cases, these are victims who might have normalized the experience of being exploited after being in slavery-like condition for more than a couple of years. They start actually becoming part of this entire exploitative thing. So it's a very unique situation you face where the victim is not behaving like a victim and says that I do this because I like to do this and this is my choice and things like that. Keeping both of this in mind, what do you think ideally is the procedures that a prosecutor should adopt? What is the role of a prosecutor, step by step, briefly in 2 minutes? How can a prosecutor, strengthen a human trafficking case?
Okay. You see, I'll just try to be as brief as possible and also as exhaustive as possible while attempting this. Prosecutor can't do this alone. It has to be a collective exercise, because the first contact of the victim is, if you come to with any formal law enforcement, is the police. They are the ones who engage with the victim in the initial stage of investigation. Prosecutor comes in much later. So it's important, and the prosecutor will come in contact with the victim maybe at the time the police bring her to record the 164 statement. I'm using this jargon in the hope that everybody understands what it is. So when they record the 164 statement, at that time, the police may get the prosecutor to meet the victim. So given this limitation of a prosecutor in all these, in these cases, it's important for the prosecutor that as soon as they come to know that a charge sheet, an investigation report is given to them for the purpose of filing it in the court, because that is when they get to see the whole case. So it is important that at that stage, they make sure that everything is thorough. They look at the case from the victim's point of view. They understand that this is a case of trafficking and it's a continuing offense involving multiple players at various tiers of levels, where a different kind of offenses have been committed by various people. And for them to completely make a thread to the time when the victim was first trafficked, when she first left her home, a safe zone, maybe a home, maybe a school, wherever she's first been taken from, and to the time she has come to the stage where she's been rescued. So it's important for them to understand that link from her point of view. So it's important that as soon, whenever the final investigation report is being given to the police, when the police brings in the final investigation report to the prosecutor, it's important for them to tell them at that time that I need an interview with the prosecutrix. That doesn't happen. It's very unconventional, it is very unorthodox, but there's no bar in the law for them to doing that. That's the first thing that they need to do. The moment they do that, the moment they get to a space where they are able to understand victim's point of view what has happened, they can contribute positively to the investigation report of the police. They can actually tell them that these are the things which are missing. And that's a big enhancement of the quality of the police case. Thereafter, the second time when they will meet the prosecutors is when she comes to depose in the court. It's important to them at that time to ask the police that they would like to meet the prosecutrix at least 1 or 2 days in advance to understand what's happening. They will be able to make out whether this particular victim is in a position where she's normalized herself, the whole offense, or she has been induced, she's been threatened, there are limitations in her deposition. These are something they will come to know at that point in time. This is the second intervention that they can make within the confines of the law, which will ensure that they will actually have effective, more successful prosecution. These are the two things. The third thing is, which I keep telling them constantly, is that they should treat lawyers of the victim as their friends. not as their enemies. That's the biggest challenge I've had. And Sunita, you and I were together in the first case. The biggest challenge we had was the prosecutor, not the defense lawyer, who was constantly challenging our existence, asking us, why are you in this court? Who are you? What is your locus standi? You are nobody to come here. I'm going to do this case. And the defense was actually sitting back and watching the fun. All that was missing was popcorn, because otherwise the defense was having a great time. So unfortunately, with all the intervention of UNODC, the US Embassy across, the AHTUs, and constant training which happened for many years now, we are at least acceptable by the prosecutor, not in all cases, in many cases. So that bridge is being gapped. And this is a constant endeavor. Coming back to the question about the continuous process of it, even at every stage, there are so many things that the victim knows, and victim is able to share with her lawyer, because she has more access to her than with the prosecutor. Like, for example, in POCSO cases, we have a support person appointed by the court. So the support person is kind of a link between the court and the victim. Similarly, it's important for the prosecutor to identify the civil society organization to be a link between the prosecutor and the victim. So if such links are established, the prosecutor can actually enhance the case, because he will be able to understand what is happening. He will also know if a victim is going to be turning hostile, because he's not in touch with her. Many times what happens is they are in shock when the victim turns hostile in the court, because that's the first time they come to know about it. I think the basic thing they need to do is they need to leave their doors open for the victims, and also let the victims know that their doors are open. As long as that doesn't happen, these challenges, these challenges do remain. If these three steps are taken care of, it will really go a long way to understand the victim's case in the court. And we are not conventional lawyers. Our approaches are very unorthodox, but we are not violating the law. And that's what I constantly keep saying, that, it's a strategy. We are dealing with a series of criminals who are extremely organized and who have a lot of resources at our disposal. We have none. We neither have the manpower, nor do we have the resources. So we have to constantly evolve our strategies to make sure that we bring them to book. And prosecutors and victim lawyers are on one side in this whole battle. And as long as we're able to make that message clear to each other, we'll go a long way. This is my contribution. I think, I think as Cassandra may have more, to say this, because I think they practice in Bombay. The special court is there, and the special court may have contributed. I'm sure she may have other experiences to share.
Before I ask Cassie to respond to that, let me ask Premnath. I take whatever points that Aparna has said, and I pick one of her challenges. Does the prosecution feel uncomfortable if the courts grant permission to private lawyers, private advocates to assist them? Is there a certain kind of discomfort? On a separate note, Premnath, I also want you to answer on, when a prosecutor comes to know that a private lawyer is representing vested interests to file custody petition of the victim. And you know that as soon as a girl is rescued from a brothel, all kinds of people come in the court, father, mother, brother, sister, husband, wife, whatever, with all the ration card and Aadhaar card. And obviously, they are funded by the traffickers. Obviously, they are supported by. So what can a prosecutor do when he knows very clearly that this private lawyer is coming with a vested interest?
Thank you. I'm just wondering about Aparna what said, because I have not seen such prosecutors in this part of the country who are quarreling with the victim's advocate, because we will be very happy to meet them and discuss with them, because they are going to be our strength. Since we don't have any connection to the victim, because the poor prosecutors are getting the case diaries just the morning of the case day, or just the immediate previous day only. So if there is a victim's advocate, because that concept has not come to Kerala so far, in most of the cases, victims are directly connected with the prosecutors. So it is we'll be very happy to associate with them. And not only me, all the prosecutors who are assembled here and also watching the FB Live, they'll be very happy to have a good association with the victims council. And those who are not doing it, my kind request is that please start doing it right from today onwards, at least. And as far as there are, as rightly pointed out by Sunita ma'am, there are some advocates who are representing, recently I had a representing both the accused and the victim. Both the advocates are from the same office. The senior will be for the accused, and the junior advocate will be filing a wakalat for the victim also. And because both of them show their own enrollment number and other thing. So it is very difficult to find out these things. And whenever we find out, we should do something else on that matter also. Because even the ITP Act section 17 is giving a power, 72 is giving a power to the magistrates to inquire about what is happening and whom should be given and thing. So those who are having a harmful influence over the child or a girl, whoever it may be, the court is also a duty to look upon the person who is representing the victim. So in that circumstances, the court will more hear the words of the prosecutor than the victim's advocate. And again, there is another issue also in section 72 itself in the proviso, what says that the court should invite, while deciding about the custody petition, the court should invite 5 respectable persons, and 3 of them should be women also. So court should form a committee, even though that is not stated in the act. So all these things will help the court and also the prosecutor to see that victims, the best interest of the victim is always protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Premnath. You both, Aparna ji and you, spoke about the victim, and so my next question to you is to you, Cassandra, and this is going to focus on the victim. Now, for the victims of human trafficking, testifying or even appearing in a court can be very scary. Essentially, victims are put in a stand and they are made to feel as if it is the victim which is on trial. Now, unfortunately, it is their character, their decision making, and other personal choices that end up being questioned and put at issue by the court. Now, so in the present prevailing conditions of court, how can the prosecutor facilitate a victim-centric court environment?
Thank you for that question, Salil. And what I would like to say is, yes, you rightly put it that at the time when the victim comes to court, very often the victim feels like she is on trial because she sees that the accused has maybe a battalion of lawyers along with him, or along with him or her. When the victim comes into court, she may or may not be accompanied by a support person. She should be accompanied by a support person, but very often, even she's not, she doesn't have the privilege of even that. She comes in, she looks at the judge sitting on the dais, she looks at the defense lawyers, she looks at the prosecutor. She has no idea who the prosecutor is. She does not know that the prosecutor is the one who's going to represent her. So it's very important at this very first stage that the prosecutor makes the victim feel comfortable, keeping in mind the trauma that she's gone through, keeping in mind that she's not just another witness. It is daunting for any witness who comes into court to testify in any situation. But for this girl who has been through, like gang rape and multiple rapes and been through so much of trauma, it's even more traumatic. She has a fear of confrontation with the accused. She feels that she is not socially acknowledged. She has no support, and also the perception that the system is actually protecting the accused. What can be done is very simple. Make eye contact with the victim. Speak kindly to her. Repeat instructions without getting impatient. She may not be following the language that is being spoken in court. She may not understand because she's so traumatized even coming into the courtroom, So listen to what she has to say. Any kind of harsh cross-examination that is coming in from the defense lawyer, oppose that harsh cross-examination. Very often the victims, when they first give their 161 statement, it's often on the night of the rescue, although we actually ask the police not to take their statements on the night of the rescue and to give them some time to actually settle down in the rescue home and then take their statement. So very often the statement that she first gives, she may have spoken some amounts of untruth from the point of view of shielding her family, from the point of view of shielding herself, because she does not trust the police. Very often these statements are brought up and she's confronted with them. She's questioned and ridiculed about these statements by the defense lawyers. it's very important for the prosecutors at this point of time, even after the cross-examination gets over, to ask for a re-examination to be done and particularly point out those specific areas that will make or break the case for the victim. Another thing that the prosecutors must do is oppose adjournments. It takes the victim a lot of time to actually to make up their mind to actually even come to court to testify. It's not an easy decision that the victim makes because she has to face her perpetrators again. So every time they have to come to court, they are reliving the trauma that they've been through. So it's very important that the victim comes into court and that she's allowed to testify on that same day. Everything gets over. The examination, the cross-examination, and she does not have to relive that trauma and come into court. When we first started our casework in Mumbai, we had cases where victims would come into court as many as 11 to 12 times. And the matter would just keep getting adjourned because they would make excuses. Either one of the perpetrators would remain absent, or the defense lawyers would remain absent, or the judge may have had many things on their plate on that particular day. It's very important for the prosecutor to stand up for the victim in these times and actually oppose these adjournments. Another thing is also the victim is your star witness. If the victim does not testify, your case could break. So in cases where the victim may be repatriated back to her hometown, back to her home state or a home country, very often it's very difficult to get the victim to come back. So we have to make use of video conferencing in these instances, and it's not unheard of. Now, especially during the lockdown times, video conferencing has become the norm, and this has been going on. Rightly, as Aparna ma'am spoke about video conferencing, right? In so many years, organizations have actually been pushing the system to have video conferencing for victims. It's very important for the prosecutors to push for this. This ensures that the victim is not, her rehabilitation is not affected. At the same time, she gets an opportunity to actually speak about what she has been put through by the defense lawyers. So these are some of the things that the prosecutors can actually do in order to make the whole experience of court more bearable for the victim when she comes into court to testify.
Thanks, Jessie. And I'm going to continue with you. In fact, on some points that you made. In fact,
Right.
A very pertinent point that cases continue for years, and every single time there's an adjournment, the victim has to come back, and the way she is made to feel is so important. But I'll just go back to the question that Sunita had for Mr. Premnath, and you're on the other side. From your own experience, and what has it been like to work with the prosecution when you've been invited as a private lawyer to work with the prosecution?
Right. And here I would agree with what Aparna said, because as I said, when we first began our casework in Mumbai representing the victims of trafficking, it was really difficult. It was a real struggle. We would have prosecutors who would look at us with suspicion, wondering who we were, not wanting to give us a listening ear. Sometimes we would, despite the judge actually approving the 301 application, the prosecutors would not want to have anything to do with us. So we would just have to silently sit and watch the matter and the proceedings. And if needed, actually approach the judge directly in order to intervene in the proceedings. It's been a long struggle, a long road from there to come to the point where now we find that prosecutors are more willing to accept our help. They've seen that we mean no harm, that we mean no harm to them, that all that we're trying to do is actually assist the prosecution with their case. So it's taken a lot of years, but we've come to a place right now where in Mumbai and in our neighboring districts, the prosecutors are willing to accept our assistance. Another thing I would just like to point out is the role of the Legal Service Authority here. We have the National Legal Service Authority has actually rolled out a scheme whereby victims of trafficking can be represented by advocates who are specially empaneled to represent them. We've taken this up, and actually in Mumbai, Thane, and a few of the districts, in 5 of the districts in Maharashtra, we've actually set up legal aid clinics along with the district legal service authorities, and we have actually helped empanel very sensitive lawyers who actually come on board now, and matters are referred to them, and they've been able to actually represent these victims right from the time where the rescue happens at the police stations and even at the remand and through the trial. And I'm very happy to say that we've been able to represent more than 600 victims in court through these legal aid clinics. And I think that this is something that should be replicated all across the country. The legal service authorities should actually empanel sensitive lawyers who can come forward and actually assist the prosecutors in these matters.
Thank you, Cassandra. Very important points that you made. We have over 300 plus participants, and a lot of you, most of you, prosecutors. And I would be shocked out of my wits if I did not see you posing questions. I mean, that is what you do for a living, right? I really hope we see more questions coming up, not just here, but also on Facebook, so that we can come back and ask more questions outside the ones that our panelists are asking. Premna ji, or Rozdar Saab, my question is to you, and it is again dealing with the process of investigation, how you respond to it. So we do come across situations where we see that the investigation has been botched up by say the police because of various reasons, and it could be because of lack of training and others. But there is, as we have seen in the previous episode of the reality check, that this has also sometimes happened because there has been connivance between the police and the traffickers when it has come to investigation. So how do you deal with situations like these, or a situation which Sandra raised, where your star witness does not support the prosecution? So, basically two questions to you, Rozdar Saab.
Please, I'm very happy to receive those important questions. So the first thing is I would like to mention that 4 things. That the role play of each stakeholder collectively gives success of the success story. Never one particular agency or a stakeholder can win the case, whole case. Because here in representation, where there is no proper representation, there will be no proper relief, appropriate relief, and no justice ultimately. So the representation before the court is a kingpin point. And at the time of the investigation itself, the police shall have good close association with the prosecutors to discuss the cases and to construct the case perfectly from all the corners. This is one absent in the field reality, because very rare the police officers will have interaction with the prosecutors to connect the offender with the crime. This is one important point. That's, once the case is at initial stage is weakened, it is very difficult to reconstruct it during the course of the trial. So the police training, means specifically the police shall be given a special training for the purpose of dealing with these type of cases. That is, one unit should be created separate. Then coming to the second aspect is, my another panelist has discussed about the role of the prosecutors in why the role of the private advocate is reduced. That is very, very important to understand. Here, the public prosecutor is a person who is representing the state, because when a serious offense has been committed, this offense has not been committed against the victim alone. It is against the society. That is why, as a protector of the citizens, the state is taking the responsibility of prosecuting and punishing the offenders, and the public prosecutor, being a representative of the state, stepping into the shoes of the state and to conduct the prosecution effectively and efficiently. So here some gap is creating. This means a balance has to be maintained between the expectations of the victim and the efficiency or promptness of the public prosecutor. When coming to the field realities, the victim will appear before the public prosecutor just 1 day or 2 days earlier only. Earlier, they will have no discussion to have a direct dialogue to prepare the victim in a perfect manner. So the police police are sometimes with the NGOs, but not in all the cases. Suppose there are 4 cases, sensational cases that I have conducted prosecution. In all the 4 cases, I got conviction as well as the rehabilitation orders. So that is with the help of NGOs. NGOs appeared along with the victim. They produced and they interacted, they prepared well the victim and produced it before me, and I too interacted with the victim in advance and prepared well within the corners of the law permissible to adduce the evidence. Suppose if the victim is allowed to have a private advocate, what will happen? The private sometimes this may go to the handling of cases directly by the victim or private individuals. The criminal cases, to the satisfaction of this personal vengeance, will appear. So the prosecution must be conducted within the 4 corners of the principles of fair trial and fair process. So the personal vengeance has to be kept aside. Only the fair trial procedure has to be adopted. So the responsibility of the public prosecutor is very heavy. The public prosecutor must satisfy himself that the preparation should be within the corners of the permissible limits of the fair trial. The second thing is he must be effectively adduced the evidence. Once the evidence is effectively adduced, the voice of the victim will certainly reaches to the bench. So here what is happening, the role of the public prosecutor is very, very important. At the same time, the role of the magistrate or the judges, as the case may be, being a guardian of rights, is very, very important to have a proactive role. The wonderful orders that can be passed by the magistrates, more or less under ITP Act, 12 orders can be passed. So maybe with regard to the shelter, with regard to the grant, with regard to the counseling, with regard to the medical examination, medical treatment, and all other things. But the proactive role of the judicial proceeding of officers are also missing in. So please.
Yes,
Rosar,
Mr. Pranav, please go ahead.
Rosar, you complete and then we will ask Premnath to.
Yes.
Yes, you complete.
So proactive role of the magistrate or the judges, as the case may be, is also equally important. So there is a necessity of extending training to the judicial officers, very, very important. Here in Andhra Pradesh, so far as in Andhra Pradesh, police, many batches of the police have undergone training. All the public prosecutors have undergone training, but very few batches of judicial officers have undergone the training. So here he is the guardian of the rights. Proactive role, not overactive, proactive role is missing. That's why we are unable to reap the appropriate relief, reap the fruits of the legal remedies in favor of the victims. So that missing link has to be taken care of. There's 3 things that what I would like to role play of the public prosecutor, and role play of the magistrate, and role play of the police officer, and role play of the NGO. All are equal, not like this. One is heavily burdened and another is very easy going. So collective work is very, very important to achieve the goal. And one more thing is, one point that I would like to place before the Sunita Madam. One private bill has to be introduced that with regard to the victims of the Trafficking Protection Act has to be bring into the picture. So as to a chapter, at least, even not a specific legislation, a chapter has to be incorporated in appropriate legislation, just like in SC/ST Atrocities Act recently, chapter 5A has been added. So for the best protection of the victims, similarly, trafficking victims need such protection, so that apparently on the statute book, we can find that protection of the victim is taken care of. So a separate chapter has to be incorporated either in ITPA or in CRPC. So procedural aspects have to be, a chapter has to be incorporated in that legislation. That is that will work with more effective for our success. Effectively, that is.
Thank you so much, Rosa Garu. Luckily for us, we took your suggestion way back in 2004 itself. Our Supreme Court PIL 56 by 2004, which Aparna Bhatt, ma'am, has been representing us in the Supreme Court, is on victim protection protocol. And thanks to that Supreme Court PIL in 2015, we got a very interesting direction from the Supreme Court that a comprehensive legislation will be formed for protection of victims and also to counter trafficking. The new bill is ready. It is just passed through the
2019 bill is ready.
Yes, 2019 bill went through the Lok Sabha, but could not go to the Rajya Sabha. So it elapsed. So a new revised bill in 2020 has been prepared, which has now been passed. I understand from yesterday's conversation with the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare that the group of ministers have already passed it. It is going to the cabinet anytime next week, and maybe in the next parliament session, we will have a comprehensive legislation to counter trafficking, where victim protection will become the right of every victim in this country. Prem, you wanted to answer the same question, please.
No, the basic issue of such cases starts from the defective charge sheet, the final report. Actually, there is no scrutiny of charge sheet happening, as far as my knowledge is concerned, except in few states of India. In all other states, the police officers in charge of the investigation is directly filing the charge sheet before the court, and prosecutors do not have any role. So they have a free walk to the court, and prosecutors comes to the knowledge of the case only few days back of the case. They will just hand over the case file and everything after issuing summons to the particular witness. This was because formally there was a proactive discussion with the prosecutors and police on filing final charge sheet. They will submit a draft charge sheet before the prosecutors, and prosecutors will approve it. Then only they will file the final charge sheet before the court. But after a decision of the Honorable Supreme Court in 2000 by Justice K.T. Thomas in Sarla versus Velu, the court observed that it is the duty of the prosecutors begins in the court and not out of the court. That was what he said. But it was that decision, even though it was not particularly overruled. There is another discussion in 2014, State of Gujarat versus Kishanbhai, where the court observed that it is a duty of the prosecution machinery after completing the entire collection of evidence. It is a duty of the prosecution machinery to go through the evidence, and if necessary, they have to file a petition for further investigation and all those things. So scrutiny of the charge sheet must be mandatory in trafficking in all cases, but especially in cases like trafficking. When charge sheets are filed before the court without any scrutiny, just on the whims and fancies of a police officer, he may be helping the accused also. So that should be we have to take a particular decision on that aspect.
Rosa Garu.
To answer Premnath, the one thing that I would like to request all my public prosecutors present here, that we are missing one thing. Being a public prosecutor for 23 years, my experience, what it says, some earlier to me, some other public prosecutor worked in the particular station, and then I joined in that same post. And when a case is coming for opening for prosecution, it is the prime duty of every prosecutor must satisfy with the charges framed by the court. Charge sheet is not having any evidentiary value. There is no evidentiary value to the charge sheet. It is only to assist the court to enable to frame the charges. The charge sheet has been filed. So the role of the public prosecutor here is very, very important. Unless the public prosecutor satisfies with the charges framed by the court, we shall not proceed with the trial. We must request the court to recast the charges appropriately, specifically as to the individual and also joint liability with other public other accused. So unless here the public prosecutors are not concentrating as to the charges what are framed by the court, and they take it as casual, they start with the evidence. No, it shall not be done. The first thing we have to take care of that the public prosecutor must satisfy that the charge framed by the court is appropriate or not. Is it specifically against a particular accused or not? Whether it is creating any joint liability or not. So, if it is not so, then we have to file a memo for recasting of charges. This is missing, one missing link for which we are unable to let in proper evidence. So that is a missing link in it.
Thank you, Rozdar Garu. I don't know. For me, this conversation is becoming so mesmerizing that I'm not able to type any questions, and I can imagine all the other guests sitting here, the 320 odd public prosecutors who are attending the Zoom conference right now, and the thousands that are on FB Live. I can imagine the same state of, because we just want to like really soak up every word that is being said, because not many of these things we have never heard. And so my question now is to Aparna and Cassie. It's a common question, and I want you all to answer it in a way that you're not repeating each other. Is, you know, you're private lawyers and you've had difficulties in getting a foothold in the court. But listening to Premnath and Rozdar Garu, you know, there's so many challenges and limitations under which a prosecutor is working. He or she is the voice of the victim, yet the person is working under such a limited environment. So Aparna, to you and to Cassie, what are the limitations under which a prosecutor is functioning, and how can a prosecutor overcome it? What are the ways to overcome these limitations? Aparna, may I ask you this question first?
You see, I mean, the interesting part is Mr. Rozdar and Mr. Premnath and I are echoing, and also Cassandra, of course, similarly, we're saying about the same thing with very little disagreements. To answer your question about how to make sure that the prosecutor is able to meet all the challenges and within the limitation that they have, you see, these challenges that Mr. Rozdar mentioned and Mr. Premnath mentioned are, it's there, it's very much there. And we need a systemic change to make sure these challenges are met with. A scrutiny of charges, an investigation report, engaging with the police, talking to victims, these issues are there. But there are some simple things which a prosecutor can do. And I'm not saying everybody's not doing it. I'm sure many of them are already doing it. People who are not doing it, they do some simple things. For example, if I, as a prosecutor, come to know that today is the 25th of September, on the 29th of September, I have this case. You know, in our calendar, we come to know that we are going to have this one as a witness. Asking the police to allow them to meet the witness one day in advance. It's not illegal. It's not against the law. It will really help. Because, you know, it's the victim, see, this is a serious, at least in sex trafficking cases, this is a sex crime that is committed. Many of them are not comfortable to talk about it in the court. So it's useful if a prosecutor has got a comfort level with the victim, and the victim knows that, okay, this is my lawyer. You know, even if they don't, even if there's no private lawyer allowed, many of them cannot afford private lawyers. Many of them, the legal aid lawyers or pro bono lawyers are not available for many of the victims who come to court. So at that time, if the victim comes to know that this lawyer appearing for the police is also my lawyer, it will make a huge difference. And the prosecutor will also know what to expect from the victim. This is one thing that they can do. Second thing that I think that's another collective effort is that to access resources, you know, with the intervention of the US Embassy, civil society organizations, UNODC and Ministry of Home Affairs, a lot of good things have happened. And one of them is the huge resource base that's created. Today, if you go to the MHA website, or you go to Prajwala website, or you go to UNODC website, the amount of resources that is available for prosecutors is amazing. It will be useful if we can access this and make sure that in every kind of case of trafficking, what is it that we can do to enhance our case? You know, technical things like a judgment, a case law, a precedent, which will actually allow us to improve our case, improve our, you know, the way we can conduct the case better. This is the second thing that I think which will really enhance. The third thing, within the limitations, I'm saying these limitations are there. They're not for a moment discounting it. Within the limitations, if you come to know at any point in time, for example, talking about remand, or even the bail order, for example, when we come to know in a case of trafficking, people get bail so easily. At that time, if you can recommend that you challenge this order in a higher court, that you give a recommendation and then insist that the order challenge in the higher court, and if you will actually be then putting you're making the defense lawyer's job a very, very difficult thing. What is happening now in most cases is, please forgive me if I don't want to target any individual prosecutor here, but whenever a bail order is granted in a case of trafficking, unless it is a case which is involving high stakes, there is no challenge by the state. And the police, when the prosecutor can name somebody else. But the truth is that today there is no recommendation made to challenge it. And similarly, many cases of acquittal also, there are no challenge. There are no recommendations for appeal and other things that happen. So these are some of the things that I would request prosecutors to proactively take. I'm kind of slightly digressing from the question put to by Sunita, but this will also go a long way, because we should remember that the trial gets over in the trial court, but the case as far as the victim is concerned does not get over. The accused, the convict, or the person who gets acquitted will go to the High Court, will go to Supreme Court. But unfortunately, the same rigor is not shown by the state. And for us, sir, you are the state. As lawyers, you are the state. And I think if you recommend that this has to happen, an appeal has to be filed, a division petition has to be filed, it will take us a long way. And people like us will definitely support and complement in whatever way we can. These are some of the things that I can say. Given the fact that the limitations are there, to bring in systemic changes, we will take many decades. But doesn't mean trafficking does not take place. Victims will continue to get abused. We can't let our victims run totally high and dry just because the systemic change is coming very slowly. Yeah, maybe now because Cassandra can complement perhaps.
Thank you, Aparna. I can tell you that I've been a witness in several human trafficking cases, and the public prosecutors have not even met me even 1 hour before the case. We have just gone straight into the court and given our evidence. I was just telling Salil just before this webinar started that in the last 25 years, we've had very, very few experiences where a public prosecutor said, I want to meet the victim one day before. We've had very, very few things. So I think these are possible things within the limitation that we are working in that we can do. Cassie, to you, how would you look at this question without repeating anything that Aparna has said? Cassie, are you still there? Cassie?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So just agreeing with everything that Aparna said, I just want to add this whole aspect of convergence. One of the reasons why we've realized that our cases, our prosecution cases with IJM have been so successful has been because we've been able to converse with each other. We have social workers in our office. At any point of time, we are able to talk to each other and talk to each other about the case, find out the loopholes, the weaknesses about the case. I think this is something that is lacking in the system. It's very important for the prosecutors to actually speak with the investigating officer, to find out more about the case. Very often the investigating officers who actually comes to the court may not be the one who was actually on the rescue. So there are certain details of the case that get missed out in between. Another thing I want to point out is, again, convergence. But this time with regards to convergence between the trial court prosecutor and the appellate court prosecutor. Very often the details, the facts of the case, things that come out during a trial does not get sent up to the appellate court. And then at the appellate court level, it's like a whole new thing all over again. The the accused might still have their same defense lawyers and they know everything that there is to know about their case. But for the victim, it's a brand new prosecutor, it's a brand new lawyer who's looking into a case and does not really know about how she deposed, what happened at the trial court. So it's very important for the trial court prosecutors and the appellate court prosecutors to actually talk to each other and a briefing to actually happen so that nothing is lost in between. So these are 2 points that I wanted to put out, like adding to Aparna's points.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandra. We are at 5:40. We've been discussing this almost for an hour and 10 minutes, and pretty much coming to the end of questions that the moderators have. So I'll pose the last question, and before we go on to audience questions, and we've received some very good questions, I must say. And this is to both of you, Mr. Premnath and Mr. Rosadara. I really enjoyed the back and forth between the two of you with your varied experience coming in. And I'll shift a little on the forms of trafficking. There are newer forms of trafficking that we are today confronted with. Cyber trafficking is one of them. So my question to both of you, and I'll go with you, Mr. Premnath, first, are whether our prosecutors are equipped to handle these new forms of human trafficking and its impact on the victims. Where do you see there are gaps, and what do you think can be done to bridge these gaps when it comes to the newer forms of trafficking where some of our prosecutors are not aware of these issues?
My answer is unfortunately it is no. Because as on date, we have not received, none of the prosecutors have received a training on cyber laws or a cyber laws or a new type of new cases and other thing. And another thing which worries me a lot is that after this COVID, now we are in the COVID, because there will be a lot of white collar and blue collar crimes will be increased day by day. So such things, because now internet is a order of the day, and everybody started using now how to misuse it also. So a lot of such cases will happen every day, and it is going to be a curse to the entire country because of this COVID and everything. So there should be a proper training as far as the new types of cases are concerned. And as on now, the prosecutors are ill-equipped with such new type of cases.
Rosadar Saab?
Sir, after independence, only the first time in the 2006, the trainings for the prosecutors, police, and judicial officers started. The active cooperation of NGOs, Prajwala, and enlightened sensitization programs were conducted. More particularly nowadays, 50% and more than 50% are non-cadre prosecutors are there in the field, but there is no training for them. Though the special public prosecutors were appointed for POCSO court and some other special court, even SCST trafficking cases will be there. So in these cases, the public prosecutors, they shall be given training, perfect training, before they are taking up the cases for conducting prosecution in the courts. There is absolutely no trainings have been given. So no doubt, the cadre prosecutors are from the basic training itself, they are getting some training and refreshing course, sensitization programs are giving to them. But whereas the new prosecutors who are newly appointed for a tenure, 3 years or from or so and so, those prosecutors are not given any basic training regarding trafficking or POCSO and other things. Only 1 day or 2 days sensitization programs are given. This is one important point, that they are unable to find and solve the intricacies of the procedures and the substantial laws. And if they continue the same for 1 year, then all the cases conducted during the first year will go. There will be no success story. So at the time of appointment itself, they should be given training, then they should be given charge of public prosecutor in the special courts. That is one important thing.
Thank you, Rosadar Garu. And I'm watching the time here. My God, we are coming closer to 6 o'clock. It is over an hour and a half that we are talking to each other, and what an amazing conversation this is. And I want to get into the audience questions now, because I think it's very important to hear to the audience too. But it saddens me deeply as an activist and as a human rights defender that we who are, the ones who are the good ones, who want slavery to end, we want exploitation to end. We seem to be so disorganized, so fragmented, so less coordinated. That is, the traffickers and the organized criminal syndicates are so powerful, so well networked, so well organized. Today, we continue to talk about offline trafficking while the online trafficking is just going hammer and tongs. We have now all social medias, Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram, Snapchat, everything being used to traffic anybody. And it's no more about that poor girl, Dalit girls, somebody who is deprived and marginalized. It could be your own child, it could be our own daughter who is having online access. Anybody is vulnerable to be trafficked, and it really worries me. It really worries me as a humanitarian and as a human rights defender that trafficking has come so close inside our houses, and yet we are not equipped to handle it. I would like to have all of you all have this thought in your mind as we take up the audience question. And I would like to ask the first question to both our esteemed prosecutors. This is a question that is been asked by one esteemed prosecutor in our Zoom conference, and I don't want to mention the name, but I will ask the question to both the prosecutors. Section 321 of CRPC is very clear, and yet very, very few prosecutors apply it when the prosecution is not satisfied with the charge sheet. Why do you think prosecutors have such hesitance to apply Section 321 of CRPC? Premnath, to you and to Mr. Rosegar.
321 is a withdrawal from prosecution. Because once you withdraw from the prosecution, I think Rosa will agree with me. Once you withdraw from the prosecution, it will be very difficult to file another charge sheet. So instead of withdrawal, I don't know what the concerned prosecutor has thought in his mind, but instead of withdrawal, there are a lot of opportunity. No, if the cake is not good, you can put some flavors on it and you can give to the judge, because there are a lot of weapons in CRPC which we have given. For example, we can file the petition under Section 216 for charges. For if there are any error in charges, if you want to add or delete some particular charge section of law, you can file a 216 petition. You can summon any document and under 91 of CRPC. You can file petition under 311 to summon any witness. You can file petition under 310 for a local inspection. If the scene master or a particular place, the scene plan is not correct. So there are many tools which are already available in the CRPC. We can effectively use that, or we can file a petition under the 173(8) of CRPC for further investigation. But filing a 321 petition withdrawal at this stage, I think it will be very dangerous, because it will be difficult to file another charge sheet, another pakka charge sheet before the court.
Rosa Garu, do you want to attempt at answering this question? Rosa Garu, are you there?
Please. Yes. Madam, regarding 321, I would like to mention one thing important, which is very, very important. Before taking a decision to file any application under 321, first the public prosecutor must satisfy himself whether the investigation is carried on proper lines or not. If it is not on proper lines, he can write it to the proper concerned authorities and ask for a request for reinvestigation. Suppose if the investigation has not done properly, the investigation officer has missed the important links and filed the charge sheet, and thereafter approached the public prosecutor for filing 321, then even at any stage, the reinvestigation can be taken up instead of going for 321. Second is, 321 is not sole in the hands of the public prosecutor. Even if the 321 application is filed, there are checks and balances. The judicial officer or presiding officer, he has to apply his mind whether it is done in the interest of the justice or not. So when there is no there is no interest of the justice, the judge, the concerned magistrate has to dismiss the application. He will not allow it. So it is not so easy to invoke 321. 321 has to be invoked in only in appropriate cases where that is in the interest of the justice only, not in individual justice. If the investigation is not proper, then we can ask for re-investigation.
Thank you, Rozdar Sahab. Lots of questions, but I think I'm going to come to you, Aparna ji, with the next question. So the question that is being asked here is, the most important stage to protect the victim and represent her is the stage of bail. Grant of bail without stringent conditions results in the accused going absconding. How can this situation be taken care of?
You see, as far as a victim's advocate, as a victim's lawyer, my role gets very, very limited. In many jurisdictions, what happens is when an application for bail is filed, 99 times out of 100, or maybe 100 times out of 100, the victim is not even informed. There is no information given to the victim at all. So the victim is not informed, the victim lawyer is also not present. It's the prosecutor who represents at that point in time. And then, the bail is granted and conditions are sometimes ridiculous. It's really of no use. It's only much later we come to know and we challenge it. So this is, as a victim lawyer, my role gets extremely diminished and limited with respect to this. In addition to that, with respect to the prosecutor himself, what happens is, and this I've seen, the general tendency, except with the few exceptions, the prosecutor is, most of them are so dependent on the police officer coming to brief them. And many times what happens, I've also seen this, the person sent to brief the prosecutor is so incompetent that he's not even giving the full picture to the prosecutor about the case. Now, if the prosecutor does not know how serious the case is, he will take that case as casually as a person instructing him. And invariably the bail gets granted. I want to add another aspect to this. There are two ways in which people we are familiar with the criminal procedure code, so we explain. We are assuming everybody else knows. There is a process. If let's say the person is arrested and he's in the judicial custody, if the police do not file the charge sheet within a statutory period of time, 60 days in some cases, 90 days in some cases, then he gets automatically bailed because of their default. And what we have seen is that if the last day to file the charge sheet is the 90th day, on the 89th day, they come with the charge sheet report, saying the report is ready, now we'll file it. Now, invariably, what happens, the prosecutor is in a dilemma at that point in time. If they ask them to come back with a better report, the man will get bail the next day. He will be out on bail. If they file that report as it is, the prosecution case is completely damaged. So these are some challenges. So one of the things I wish we could have a space in which we can have this kind of an engagement where the moment the police FIR gets registered and the moment that the police are in a position to do the investigation report, they engage with the prosecution. And coming back to your question about bail, it's an extremely tricky situation. And absconding is one thing that you talked about, Salil, and the person who asked the question. My challenge has been, they come out on bail and they actually intimidate the victims. Yes. They try to reach out to them. They also harass them because most people do not understand the law. So in fact, many times they come and they actually go to victim's family and say, see, I'm out. Nothing is going to happen to me. And then and many victims believe that this guy is out means he's out, out, and the meaning that he's not going to get convicted. These are all nuances of human behavior which happens. So the challenge is not just getting absconding. Absconding is something else because, okay, he's absconding, at least he's not troubling the girls anymore. But the person who comes back and intimidates them, they're the biggest challenge. And I do not have a exact correct answer to the question that you have raised. Each case we've always adapt a different strategy, and then we hope that we're successful in those cases.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aparna ji.
My question, Prem, you want to answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right. Regarding the cancellation of the bail, the local magistrate can do, because there is a decision reported in 2006 Supreme Court, AR 2006 Supreme Court 100, Amanan Shaji versus State of Kerala, where the Supreme Court held that if there is any part of violation of any of the bail condition, no need to go to any higher court for cancel the bail. The magistrate or the judge who granted the bail can cancel the bail. So the prosecutor should effectively use such a position, such a law, provision of law, and see that the bail is cancelled and he is back to the jail.
Another question from our Zoom.
Sunita, I just wanted to
yes, Aparna, please.
yeah. You know, Mr. Premnath, and what you said is completely right. Supreme Court passed a judgment and cancellation can be given, but the reality, you know, and I know, it doesn't happen like that. You know, how many victims can get the courage to go and tell the court or to tell the police or tell somebody that this person is harassing us? It doesn't happen often. And, you know, I've had cases where, not just in trafficking, even in sexual abuse cases, where the victim is abused outside the court. It's threatened outside the courtroom when she's come to depose. When we go and complain to the judge, and the judge has told the police, okay, register a fresh case, even then nothing has happened. So it is true, cancellation of bail, it's a section available under the law. There's a provision, there's a process, but how effective it is, it's something all of us know. And it's actually a kind of a joke on the victims, really speaking. Yeah, that's, I mean, and I don't know how we can address this individually or collectively. This is something that we need to have. In fact, we need to have a process where if anybody intimidates the victim, it has the complaint filed subsequently should have a far more severe kind of a sentence, which may act as a deterrent to the persons trying to intimidate.
Yeah, I love this conversation where there's so much of challenges being thrown out and solutions also being, you know, brought out at the same tone, you know, so both are happening, and I hope all the prosecutors are gaining from this very, very, very powerful conversation. My question again from Zoom, we are not having too many questions coming from FB, because I can imagine the public who does not even understand this kind of, issues, if prosecutors and people like me who have done this work for 25 years are so mesmerized by this conversation, I can't imagine, the general public who is just hearing this for the first time, what is the kind of, questions they might have. But we have very, very powerful questions coming on the Zoom itself. And this is a question, I'm not mentioning the names of the prosecutors who are asking this question, but this is coming from Odisha. And I would like to put this question to all the 4 panelists. Please answer it without repeating each other. What are the options before the prosecution when the victims go hostile in the court? Especially, maybe it is because of threat, maybe it's intimidation, maybe it's because of a Stockholm syndrome that the victim, wants to protect the trafficker. Maybe it is of several reasons. Maybe she has compromised. We don't know what reason, but she has got hostile in the court. What are the options before the prosecution, then when the victim goes hostile in the court during the trial? To all the 4 panelists, if anybody wants to start, Premnath, you want to start?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the opportunity for the prosecutors are a lot. Because we have whenever the witness turns hostile, she will be declared, or she or he will be declared hostile, and the prosecutors will get a chance to cross-examine their own witness. So whenever they are cross-examining their own witness, we can put all sorts of questions, and we can conduct vehemently ask them about questions and other things. And if during that question, if anything comes in favor of the prosecution, that prosecution can relay, because there is an amendment in 154(2), amendment 154(2) of Indian Evidence Act. There is an amendment to that effect. Formally, it was not like that. Once a hostile, entire evidence goes to the waste basket. But now, whatever in favor of the prosecution can relay. There is a recent decision of Madras High Court, Madras bench, that was Padakumar versus State. It was in February 2020. In a murder case, all the prosecution occurrence witness 1 to 3 turned hostile. So usually when prosecution witness, occurrence witness turn hostile, it will end in acquittal. But the court convicted, the district court convicted, it went on a high court appeal. High court also, a lot of discussion on victim protection bill is also there in that particular judgment, where the court held that it is a duty of the prosecutor to ask question. And in this case, the public prosecutor succeeded getting answers from the from the hostile witness in favor of the prosecution, and both the lower court and the higher court relied on that particular aspect and convicted the accused also, both in the higher court also. So it is up to the prosecutor to see that such questions are asked to the hostile witness and get answer in favor of the prosecution.
Cassie, do you want to answer this question, please?
Sorry.
Yes. While I agree with Premnath ji that yes, the victims who turn hostile can be cross-examined. I think at the very first instance, I think what comes to my mind is that if the victim has turned hostile and something has gone wrong, the state, and I'm not talking about the prosecution here, I'm not talking about the state, has failed to protect the victim. The victim is feeling intimidated, and which is why she's not coming forward with her testimony. I think it's very important if the judge allows to ask for some time, take the victim aside. If there is a counselor, if there is a support person with the victim, most likely when victims are turning hostile, they will not have a support person with them. They have felt intimidated for some reason or the other. It's very important to take them aside and possibly like it would be great to have a counselor, just somebody who would talk to them, make them understand. And if it does come to light that the victim has been intimidated, this should be brought to the notice of the court. And strict action should be taken against the perpetrator or whoever it is who has intimidated her. So yes, I do agree that cross-examination is available to the prosecution, but it's also important to get to the other aspect of why is it that the victim has turned hostile. And we may or may not get to the bottom of it, but at least an attempt should be made to get to the bottom of it.
Rozdar Garu, do you want to
Certainly.
answer this? What are the
Yes,
options before the
certainly. I agree with
prosecution?
the madam that once we identify any witness, prime witness is going to hostile, then immediately we have to take adjournment from the court convincing that she is under threat or intimidation. So we have to take sufficient time and we have to we have to counsel that witness, and we have to see what is her expectation, why she is going to turn hostile in the during the course of a trial. That is very, very important to find out. So once we can assess the prime witness, that for the reason, that particular reason that she is decided to be hostile, then we can take the support agencies, we can counsel her, we can create confidence, and then we can in the next or subsequent adjournments, we can let in her evidence. Before that, we have to inform the court that she is frightened or she is criminally intimidated, and for that reason she is not willing to give the evidence voluntarily. So that is the better option for it. That we have succeeded in Kadapa case. In a Kadapa gang rape case, we have taken adjournment, and after counseling and she come prepared for giving evidence, and thereafter her evidence was adduced, and the accused were convicted for 10 years. So this is very, very important that to take adjournment in those cases. We shall not put the witness in the witness box immediately.
Mhm.
Now to create some confidence in her mind. Certainly, if the prime witness is going to hostile, we can identify in advance, no doubt at all. If we are having touch and interaction with her in at least 4 or 5 days earlier to the trial.
Thank you, Rosaji. Aparnaji, I think.
Yes. A small. I'll just add to this. I agree with whatever they said, but in addition to that, I will also say that when we develop a case, when we actually argue the case, a prosecution will have to make sure that that heavy reliance on the victim is not there. We have to have other witnesses also. So if one person is turning hostile, the whole case should not fall like a pack of cards. We need to understand that there may be other people who have been involved. For example, rescue, there are many things. I don't think we should get into, we have the time today to get into those details about how we can develop a case. Now, I feel to place the entire burden of a huge prosecution case on one young girl or one victim is extremely unfair. So when we build up a case, we have to make sure that in addition to her, there are other witnesses who can support prosecution case, which can actually help the prosecution. And for that will require some kind of a foresight and long-term planning. Because we don't know which victim will turn hostile when, and we also don't know sometimes, even without turning hostile, how she will depose. Because a child who's grown up to be a slightly older child may completely have a different version that she'll bring in court, which will not support what you're trying to say. So so the preparation cannot be a very kind of a firefighting or a kind of an ad hoc thing. It has to have a holistic approach at the time we prepare. So and so it's a continuous thing that we need to we need to get ready on, and it's high time we start realizing that and accept it that victims will turn hostile. Victims are highly likely to turn hostile. So do we mean that just because of that we give up our case? And I think that is something we need to work a little more on. That is what I would say.
Wow, I think it is 6:05 and we should now start looking at wrapping up this wonderful virtual conference, because all the prosecutors have a long day. They've been in the courts, virtual courts, the whole day. And then after that, they are joining us in virtual conference, and still around 300 of them are still in the conference here, which shows their commitment and passion. I'm honored to be working here in Andhra and Telangana, and I belong to Kerala, so I know the situation in Kerala, and I have done huge amount of work in Odisha, and I know I've met some amazing prosecutors, amazing private lawyers. I've seen such beautiful convictions coming in these states, and I believe that each one of the prosecutors who are here are amazing human beings and amazing prosecutors, the right voices of the victims in the court. Today in this conference, we spoke of several things, and I like to borrow one line that Aparna used, and I love that sentence that Aparna started her original comment in. If you know the face of the person you're talking about, if you can meet the human being whose plight that you're discussing, your entire position in how you deal with the case will change. I think that's one of my greatest takeaway from this virtual conference. How do we engage with the victim? Do we even find some time, invest a little bit of a time to find time to go and meet her, understand what she has gone through, develop our empathy and compassion for this human being who has gone through one of the worst forms of slavery that one can talk about? Because you as prosecutors are her voice in the court. You are the state. You represent her voice. So have you heard her voice? Have you heard what she has gone through? Understanding what she has gone and getting trained in the right statutes of the law. From what Aparna and Premnath and Rozdar Garu and Cassie have been saying, there's so much already there, whether it is Supreme Court rulings, whether it is CRPC, whether it's the Evidence Act, whether it is the IPC, there's so much which is already there that we can use. Are we using it effectively for the victims? These are some of the questions that we have to play. How do we become a very proactive player to end human trafficking? How do we bring convergence between all stakeholders? How do we bring a synergy in our action? These are several of the questions that come up in this virtual conference. For me, also a learning. Today, as we close this virtual conference, let me request all our officers, please leave your email IDs on the Zoom, on the chat box, so that we can invite you again and again for the future virtual series that we have next week. And again, from this series onwards, from today's episode onwards, we are having first time ever series happening. Like today, for me, this is the first time that I've had such a forceful conversation with prosecutors and private lawyers, with 300 other prosecutors in watching this entire conversation. Next time on Reality Check 5, next week at 4:30 p.m., we have politicians. We have political leaders from different parties who are the lawmakers who will come to us, and we have more than 5 political parties who have committed, and it's going to be one of its kind conversation, because we will be asking similar questions of where they are going wrong and what needs to be done. So I would like to invite each one of you all for that conversation too. So please leave your email IDs on the chat box so that we can invite you for the next week's thing by inviting you on Zoom itself. Also, those of you all who are active on social media, I definitely would like you all to spread the message. These are conversations that cannot be restricted only to this group of people. You have the responsibility to carry it forth and ensuring that a larger world also understands this. You need to, whatever you have gained from this virtual conversation, please post it on your Twitter chat, on your FB post, if possible, if you are active on the thing. I want to thank all our panelists. Aparna Bhatt, ma'am, you have been a great support. You're Prajwala's legal counsel, and you have been our spinal cord in all the courts, from the upper, highest apex court to the lowest Hazari court. We have had you as our counsel. We as Prajwala family members are so proud to have you as our counsel, because you are the consistent voice of the victim in all our courts. To Cassie from IGM, I can't thank you enough. We together did the video conference from here to Mumbai, and I still, know the extraordinary work International Justice Mission did to facilitate that victims have their voice being heard. Thank you so much for being here. To Premnath and Rosedar, I can't thank you enough. In a system where we find so much of hostility, you are the faces which make it more human. I thank you, all the four of you all, for being part of this panel. And I thank all the wonderful, eminent prosecutors from Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and from Odisha who have joined. I want to actually make a special mention of the Director of Prosecution, Mrs. Vaijayanti from Telangana, Mrs. Mamta Sundari from Andhra Pradesh, and Mr. Rath from Odisha, who have been instrumental in ensuring that all the prosecutors participate. Thank you so much. Your help and your support and your collaboration, I would say, and your partnership today has ensured that our voices are heard to all the prosecutors that we work with. Thank you so much to all the FB audience who are watching this. I know you're watching in awe, and you're watching with so much of surprise, because this is not a conversation that happens every day in life. I want to thank each one of all the audience here. To my co-moderator Salil, you've been a pillar of strength. We have crossed our 50% mark in our series. We have entered the second part of our last phases of our series. Next week we join back to moderate session with politicians, to Swasti and Nitin, who are giving us the back end support. Thank you so much. Shubhratri to all of you all. And thank you once again for being the voices of the victims in your spaces. Thank you so much.
Thank you.